Hi my friends, Happy New Year. I'm so excited. Welcome to my very first adventure into making supplemental YouTube videos for you guys to see if it will help our cause of enjoying watercolor painting together and to give you a behind the scenes look into my working space and how I'm practically using these things and what I have set up and planned for you guys this coming year. The first thing that I thought would be really fun is to simplify our colors that we use in all of our different paintings. So I'm going to introduce to you this new limited color palette that I have put together that I'm going to make all of my class lesson plans for the entire year based off of this pretty straightforward watercolor palette. And I believe that if you were only going to get a limited palette of colors and not to change it every time, these are the colors that will give us the most bang for our buck and will get us the furthest in getting a huge range of all the colors of the rainbow, which are pretty well represented here. So but this accommodates both my portrait colors and the colors that I use for when I do botanicals. So I'll also point that out as we go. If you're not going to do portraits, some of these colors you really don't need. And if you're not going to do botanical colors, if you're not going to do botanicals, then some of these colors you really don't need. And also some of these are also just representative of a type of color. You don't need this exact same color. It's more just, I would recommend having a cool red and a warm red, for example. This concept that I have here is based off of the idea of a split primary palette. So we have a warm and a cool of our primary colors, a warm and a cool of our reds, a warm and a cool of yellow, and a warm and a cool-ish of blue. But with my modifications based on how I actually use them. So with that, let's get started and talk about the colors that I'm going to be using. And like usual, please just bring to class whatever you guys have. This does not mean go out and buy all new colors, but if you're looking to buy new colors, this will give you some insight into where I recommend you start. You don't have to start with all of these, for example. And at the end of this video, I'll go through and I'll narrow it down and say, if you're only going to get these 3 colors, get these 3. If you're only going to get 6 colors, get these 6. And which ones make more sense for portraits or which ones make more sense for botanicals. So the first color is one of my portrait favorite colors. And again, if you're doing botanicals, you can skip this color altogether. But for portraits, this for me is one of my favorite must-have colors. As you develop your own style, you might find that you like a different kind of color for your undertone. But this is an underpainting color that I use a lot. And this is Holbein's Mineral Violet. When I swatch, I like to get first a really dense representation of my color. And then, so you know, I have water control going on over here. I have this, this sponge that I use to knock down some of my water. So I'll knock back some water off of the brush, and then I'll do a couple of swipes here to let that soften so I can see the range of values. And that's inviting the color to soften out this way, and I can see it at more of a full density and a lighter density. So here we have Holbein's Mineral Violet for portraits. My next color is one that I recommend for both palettes. It's probably my #1 most important paint color that I use. It's the most versatile. I use it for mixing everything, but it's a bright, beautiful pink. And it's Winsor & Newton's Permanent Rose. There are a couple of other colors that you can use instead of this color that are similar. They're not exactly the same, but Daniel Smith makes a color called Quinacridone Rose. That's a bright pink, also another cool red. And you also could use like a Quinacridone Magenta if you have something like that. Those are just some similar options. A Permanent Alizarin Crimson is also kind of in the family of cool reds, but I would lean more towards a pink like this because, especially for botanicals, this is how I get my bright pinks, is from this color right here. And it's also light fast, whereas like an opera pink, for example, is not light fast, meaning that when it's exposed to sunlight, over time the color will fade and it will go away and it will no longer be pink. And that is not what we want to happen. So permanent rose is our friend in that way. Pyrrol Scarlet is a really beautiful warm red that I'm using. So as we go through this, we'll see a little bit that for the cools, I'm going with really transparent colors. And for my reds, I'm going with a little bit more opaque kind of colors. And that's intentional. You know, when you think about like a printer, for example, a printer uses only 3 colors, cyan, magenta, and yellow, to make all the colors. And so I can base all of my colors pretty well off of that basic triad of colors. And these warm colors just come to fill in some other gaps for me. Faces have some other kind of warm colors that are really beautiful. These are some optional replacements if you want to try a different color, or if your palette already comes with just different colors. These are some very similar colors that you can use instead. But so I have my basic triad with transparent colors, and then my warms, I like to have opaque colors in this palette because they let me build value and build colors in a way that's favorable for me. So this is a more opaque leaning yellow. Similarly, this is cadmium-free yellow, because I don't like to use cadmiums. I like to keep my palette as non-toxic as possible. This is cadmium-free yellow, and this is a good example of one reason why it's a really good idea to swatch your paints, which is the process of what we're doing here, painting out our paints to see what happens when we paint with them. Because look at this. This color with this bright yellow tag is, in fact, this warm yellow color. This is what I would call like a medium warm yellow, even though that's a cool yellow on the tag. It is a warm yellow. So that's what we have for our warm yellow today, is an opaque cadmium-free yellow by Winsor and Newton. Other colors that you could use that's common that you'll find in your palettes would be like a new gamboge. But really, I think most palettes are going to have cadmium as your yellow warm anyway. And I tried to stick within that, like what colors most palettes were most likely to already have anyway, so that you can use the default colors in your palette. But whatever version your palette has of these colors is fine. So this is like a lemon yellow. This is Hansa Yellow Light, which is representative of our cool yellows. And lemon yellow would be another variation. So here's the lemon yellow that's a variation. This is a little bit more opaque, is why I didn't go that way. I don't have the Hansa Yellow Light bottle. I used it all. The Hansa Yellow Light is more of a semi-opaque. And that's, you know, as you get on and you get a bigger collection of paints, you can have more choices. And to be clear, I also will continue to use my bigger collection of paints for my personal work as well. I'll show you that really quick so you can see more realistically. I have a lot more color. These are all of my paints, this plus this, and I like to collect them. There's no need to have this many paints. That's the thing. That's the thing that I'm interested in, and that's the thing that I like to collect. So that's what I have, and that's why I tried to narrow this down to something that's makes sense for you guys. Is what do I really need? What's going to be the collection that I need to get me through these classes? So along that boat, this is Nickle Azo Yellow. This is QOR's Nickle Azo Yellow. QOR uses a different kind of a binder called an aquazole binder, and it spreads more voraciously, which really works for me in this really super saturated but also super transparent yellow. This is my favorite yellow, and this is the one that I use realistically most often in for all of my yellows. And these two are a little bit less natural feeling for me, so I pop these in on an as-needed basis. But this is what I usually go to for my default yellow, except for when we're doing portraits. Let me show you that bottle for the Nickle Azo real quick. So here's my Nickle Azo Yellow. And with portraits, I use almost exclusively this color. This is a must-have color for me. I prefer the Winsor Newton's yellow ochre. And this is my standard yellow that I use in all portraits, regardless of skin tone. With the combination of mineral violet, yellow, ochre, burnt sienna, cobalt blue, and permanent rose, I can get just about any skin tone. And I work within those basic limited colors for almost all of my portraits, and then add accessory colors in based on clothing or reflected light, or just for fun, extra colors in the face. But if I want a realistic skin tone, those are kind of the basic triad, plus the burnt sienna and the mineral violet that I'm going to go with. Turned off those notifications. So the next color that I really like to have in my default palette, I use it for both botanicals and I use it for portraits, is burnt sienna. And the one I go back to and the one that I tend to really like is this Holbein burnt sienna. But I also really enjoy this Da Vinci burnt sienna deep. The Daniel Smith burnt sienna is a little bit too granulating for me, for how I like to use it, so I don't tend to prefer that one, whereas this one is a little bit less. So burnt sienna is a warm brown that functionally ends up feeling kind of yellow for me as I use it in practice. So that's why it's in my yellows section. The next color is Schminke's Cobalt Blue Hue, and again, I will go for a hue rather than a straight color because I try to avoid toxicity as much as possible, but this color is such a rich and beautiful blue. This is what I use for portraits. This is my portrait blue. If you're not doing portraits, you probably can get by without this blue. A color that's just as likely to be in your palette as this blue, which is you can also use just as well. It's going to be like a French ultramarine or an ultramarine blue. One difference between the French ultramarine and the cobalt blue is how granulating they are. I find that the ultramarines are more granulating, meaning they break apart into different particles and pieces, and the cobalts are a little bit less granulating. So, but they both lift really cleanly, which is really great for portraits. This blue, on the other hand, which is a little bit greener, even though it's a red shade, is staining and is terrible to lift and does not lift, which is why I don't use it in portraits. Sorry about that bang. But it's a really pretty blue in botanicals and for a bright, bright blue if you need this bright blue. So this is Winsor blue, red shade. This is also called Pthalo blue, red shade, and they're both staining colors. A lot of times in default sets, the color that comes is Pthalo blue green shade. I tend to find that I don't use that color very often. That color of green blue is just not one that I find in the natural world very often. So I tend to prefer getting the red shade Winsor blue, and instead of getting the green shade of blue in Pthalo, I go for Pthalo green, which just commits to that green tint all the way. Yeah, look at that bright, vibrant color. This is a highly staining color, very unnatural looking, but really a really beautiful mixing color. And we can talk about that later, about different ways we can mix and apply that color. There's no substitution for a Pthalo green. Viridian maybe. Viridian's kind of similar. And the last one we have is sap green. My preference of sap green is Daniel Smith. This sap green is a little more granulating, which I like in the sap green kind of realm. And it's also got a little bit more of a brown earthy tone. Like the Winsor's sap green is more bright green. It's less earthy kind of feeling. And for how I'm using it, which is mostly for, sometimes for brown mixes, but also for leaves and things that actually are green, I find that that kind of sap green really is ideal. If you guys are just getting started and you're looking to buy new paints for one of these classes and you don't already have paints, rather than buying this whole set, I would buy one based on what class you're taking. So if you're going to take one of the portrait classes, this is my portrait set that I recommend. Permanent Rose, Mineral Violet, Yellow Ochre, Burnt Sienna, and Cobalt Blue Hue. These are the portrait colors that I recommend. And for botanicals, I recommend, or woodlands, or anything else, really, I recommend that you do a split primary. And the split primary that I recommend is a warm and a cool red. So the warm red is Pyrrol Scarlet, and the cool red is Permanent Rose. The yellows are, the warm red is Cadmium. Again, that's sneaky. Remember, it's warm inside of there. The Cadmium-Free Yellow. A Cad Yellow is the warm red I would recommend, and Nickle Azo Yellow is the cool yellow, even though it's a little earthy, that I would recommend. And the warm and the cool for blues that I'm going to recommend are going to be a Pthalo blue, or also called Winsor blue red shade, and Pthalo green blue shade. And this is our cool option, and this is our warm option. And that'll give us a split primary palette. Okay, guys, Happy New Year. See you soon.